Ontario, there is a house that at first glance looks no different from the rest. A well-kept lawn, clean windows, and a family car in the driveway. This place was a
This is a true story. Oh.
This place was a symbol of peace, stability, and family happiness. But behind its walls was a darkness that the neighbors could not became the center of events that shocked not only the city, but the entire country. What began as an ordinary family idyll ended in a tragedy that changed the lives of everyone involved forever. What happened in this house? How did a place that was supposed to be the most secure in the world turn into an arena of unspeakable horror? And what made the man who was supposed to protect his family cross the line from which there is no return? This story will make you question how well you know those around you. Listen carefully, because what you are about to hear is not just a tragedy. This is a story that records the darkest hours of the human soul. Malcolm and Naomi Bennett met in Jamaica, where they both grew up in traditional families where the importance of family
I don't like Jamaica again.
Jamaica.
What happened before? Another one. That one is that the wife was having a boyfriend in their country.
Settling in Brampton, Ontario, they began to build a life from scratch. Malcolm joined the police force, aiming to become a community protector, while Naomi dedicated herself to bridging her home alone and working as a teacher's aide at a school for children with developmental delays. They were persistent, hardworking, and mutually supportive, which allowed them to quickly adapt to their new environment. A few years after moving to Canada, Malcolm and Naomi became parents. The birth of their daughter Ayla was an important milestone in their lives. Born with developmental delays, Ayla required special attention and care. It was not only a challenge for the parents, but also a test of their unity. At the time of the incident, Ayla was 13 years old. She was a child with intellectual disabilities, which meant that her thinking and emotions remained at the level of younger children. Ayla loved to draw, and her room was filled with colorful drawings of fantasy worlds, unicorns, magical forests, and magical creatures. She loved fairy tales, which she often told her mother, adding her own illustrations to them. Ayla often spent time with Naomi, who was not only her mother but also her best friend.
Hey, but I cut my hand.
Walks together in Chinikazi Park,
Wait, what?
where Ayla would enthusiastically feed the ducks and collect leaves for her applications. Her childlike sincerity and innocence were a source of joy for her parents, but also made her vulnerable to reality. For Malcolm and Naomi, raising Ayla became the center of their lives. As a police officer, Malcolm often said that his mission was to protect not only the community, but also his own family. His colleagues and neighbors considered him a role model, but at home he was reserved and did not always openly show emotion. His authority remained in question, but his relationship with his daughter was limited to formal conversations. Naomi, on the other hand, was the one who fully devoted herself to the family. She provided Ayla with the stability she needed to develop comfortably, while also trying to support her husband. Her work at a school for children with developmental delays helped her better understand her daughter's needs and provide her with an environment where she could feel safe. To neighbors in the community, the Bennetts looked like the perfect family. Malcolm was a respected officer with an impeccable reputation. Naomi was a loving mother and caring school employee. And Ayla was a charming little girl who always smiled and waved to neighbors as she passed. They participated in local events, attended church, and were always there for each other. But behind the facade of harmony were cracks. What seemed perfect turned out to be just a shell-hiding darkness. None of the neighbors could have imagined how far the problems hidden behind the closed doors of their home would go. In the first months of 2024, Naomi Bennett began to notice changes in the behavior of her husband, Malcolm. At first, it seemed like small things that she attributed to fatigue or professional stress. Malcolm had always been dedicated to his work, often working overtime to provide for his family. But suddenly, everything changed. Malcolm started staying home more often. He refused the extra shifts he had previously accepted without hesitation, and now spent more time with his family. At first glance, this seemed like a welcome change. Naomi thought that perhaps her husband was choosing to focus on his family, but his behavior became increasingly strange. Malcolm began to pay excessive attention to his daughter Ayla. He spent more time with her than ever before, and he did so in a way that seemed unusual even for a caring father. He sat with her while she drew, helped her make scrapbooks, and sometimes even picked her up from school, even though Naomi usually did. What was particularly disturbing was that Malcolm often stayed at the door of Ayla's room. He would find an excuse to be near her, either to check if she was okay or to talk about her problems. His voice was quiet and soft when he spoke to his daughter, almost coaxing. Something about this excessive attention made Naomi uneasy, but she
That is
pushed
sick.
her trying to convince herself that her husband was simply becoming more involved in her daughter's
I just don't get it, Mama.
The first real worry came when Naomi was washing Malcolm's police uniform. Among other things, she found a bottle of lavender-scented lotion that belonged to Ayla. It was her favorite lotion that she used every day. Naomi recognized it immediately because she always left the bottle on the shelf in her daughter's room. Her heart flutered. She held the bottle in her hands and tried to find some logical explanation for why it could be in her husband's pocket. Perhaps he had just taken it by accident. But the more she thought about it, the more strange it seemed to her. A few days later, Naomi overheard a conversation that finally shook her confidence. It happened late at night when she was passing by Ayla's room. The door was slightly ajar, and she heard Malcolm's quiet voice. "It's our little secret," he said gently. Ayla recalled something similar, but her childlike voice was calm. Naomi froze. The words "little secret"
Hey, Ahmed.
stuck in her mind.
Little secret.
What did he mean by that? What did he say?
Thanks for joining.
Naomi tried to find an explanation for what was happening. She argued with herself. Is it just my imagination? Or am I getting myself?
I'm cooking right now.
He's her father. He couldn't.
Maybe on the light.
Yeah.
Part of her subconscious already knew the answer, although she was afraid to admit it. She began to observe Malcolm's behavior more closely, noticing every little thing. At the same time, she felt isolated in her fears. What could she tell about her suspicions? What if she was wrong? But what if she wasn't? Naomi felt her anxiety growing with each passing day. She could no longer look at her husband the way she used to. With each passing day, a fear was building in her mind that she could no longer ignore. It was an ordinary night at the night home. The clock in Naomi's bedroom read 3 a.m. when she suddenly woke up. Her eyes fell on the empty half of the door. Malcolm was there.
What?
At first, she thought he had gone to the kitchen to get a drink of water.
Oh, I found it.
But a strange feeling began. Something didn't seem right. The silence in the house was oppressive. She listened to the faint sounds coming from the hallway, from Ayla's room. Naomi carefully got out of bed so as not to make any noise. She went to the door and froze. The faint light coming from under the door of her daughter's room seemed alien. Her heart began to beat faster. She took a step forward and saw that the door was slightly ajar. Malcolm was sitting on Ayla's bed, dressed only in his underwear. His hand was on the right of his daughter,
200.
who was wearing
Never
short
got that much
pajamas
views
fitting
in
her
ages.
He was gently stroking her leg, and his voice sounded soft but ominous. "This is our little secret, remember? No one can find out." Ayla was silent, her face puzzled. She lay motionless.
I never got that much views
looking
in
up
my
at the
life.
ceiling.
What do you
Her
think?
childlike eyes were
200.
filled with fear and confusion.
Fuck me.
Naomi froze. Her mind refused to accept what she was seeing. Seconds seemed like an eternity. Her blood was boiling, and rage began to overwhelm her shock. She sharply pushed the door open, which creaked open, cutting through the silence. "What are you doing?" Her voice sounded short, almost shouting. Malcolm flinched and jerked her hand away. He stood up quickly, trying to speak calmly. "It's not what you think, Naomi. I just wanted to make sure she was okay." "Ayla, come here," Naomi said, gesturing to her daughter, her voice trembling, but already filled with determination. Ayla got up and ran to her mother. She held onto her waist, hiding behind her back. Her body was shaking, and her eyes were filled with tears. Naomi held her close, creating a barrier between her daughter and her husband. "I saw what you were doing. You were touching her," she screamed.
I've never got that much views in YouTube. That I do, but not that much.
"You need to calm down.
This is my
You
first
don't
time.
understand the situation.
Crazy.
I would never do anything wrong. I understand everything," she said, "and I won't let you touch her ever again." Malcolm
300.
realized that excuses
Who's
wouldn't work.
promoting me?
His expression turned menacing. "You don't know who you're messing with. Do you think anyone will believe you? I am a police officer. I am respected in this community. And you?
I do
You'll
get
ruin
views, but
everything
not
for you
this
and her
much.
if you go against me.
What the fuck?
Naomi didn't listen to him.
It's
Her
all
eyes burned
promoted my
with anger.
channel.
You are a monster, and I'm not going to let you destroy us anymore. She
So
took
you're-
Ayla's hand
so
and,
you're the
keeping her
leader.
eyes on Malcolm,
Okay.
slowly walked out of the room. Her heart was beating so hard that it felt like it might burst out of her chest. When they entered the bedroom, Naomi closed the door, locked it, and grabbed her phone. Her hands were shaking, but she knew she had to act. She couldn't stay silent any longer.
Crazy.
Her main goal was to save her daughter, no matter the cost. Naomi sat in her bedroom still with her phone in her hand, her fingers hovering over the screen. Her mind wrestled with a chaos of thoughts. Should she call the police or try to solve it herself? Ayla, who was sitting next to her, had already fallen asleep, tired from the events of the night. Her quiet breathing seemed to be the only source of peace in the room. Suddenly, the bedroom door began to shake. Malcolm stood on the other side and shouted, trying to get her to open it. Naomi, open the door! You're going to destroy our family. No one will believe you. His voice was loud, but he was already panicking. He realized that the situation was getting out of hand. Malcolm was not going to let Naomi get help.
You should have
He was
called the
pounding on the
police
door with his
feds
fist, threatening her.
immediately before you
If you think you can ruin my life, think again, he shouted, his tone becoming more and more threatening.
105.
Naomi was
What?
trembling with fear and anger. Everything she had been pent up for months was now bursting out. She knew this could not go on. She would not let him hurt their daughter anymore. Her eyes fell on the drawer where Malcolm always kept his service pistol. The decision came suddenly, like a lightning strike. She opened the drawer, pulled out the weapon, and for the first time felt the cold steel in her hands. Her heart was beating faster, but her eyes were filled with unbreakable determination. She pushed open the door. Malcolm stood in the hallway, his face distorted
I love
with
Squad
anger and
Game as well.
despair. He saw the gun in Naomi's hands and froze. What are
What's
you doing?
going on?
He said. His
He's
voice
promoting
mixed with
my
fear and
YouTube.
contempt. I'm not afraid of you anymore, she replied. Her voice was cold and confident. Malcolm took a step forward, trying to convince her. Put the gun down, Naomi. You're out of your mind. It won't solve anything.
Someone's promoting my
But
YouTube.
Naomi was not listening to him.
How am I getting this
All
much
the memories of
views?
his threats, his manipulations, and what she had seen that night merged into one wave of rage. She raised the gun, her fingers squeezing the trigger. The first shot sounded loud, like thunder in the silence of the night. Malcolm backed away, holding his shoulder, but Naomi did not stop. Her hands no longer trembled. Shot after shot, her anger, pain, and fear spilled out with every pull of the trigger. The corridor was filled with the sound of gunfire and the smell of gunpowder. Malcolm fell, but she kept shooting. 14 times. Her eyes burned with the rage she had been holding back for years.
Is it
When
you,
she stopped,
Mr. Pro?
his body lay motionless, his blood spreading in a dark pool beneath him. Naomi stood panting over her husband's body, her hands trembling, but the gun still in her hand. She felt her legs carrying her to Ayla's room. She opened the door and saw her daughter standing in the corner, scared and shaking. It's over, dear, she said, trying to calm herself more than Ayla. But the thoughts in her head were chaotic. She thought about what would happen next. The courts, the journalists, the community's condemnation. How would the world look at their daughter, knowing what had happened? She was sure that society would not leave Ayla alone. Tears streamed down her face. She raised her gun and pointed it at Ayla. I love you more than anything, baby. I will always protect you. Ayla looked at her mother, her eyes filled with innocence and fear. The sound of the last shot cut through the silence. Naomi dropped the gun to the floor and fell to her knees. Her cries of despair and pain filled the house where a seemingly perfect family once lived. The quiet night in the suburb of Brampton was suddenly broken by the sound of gunfire. The first shot came like a bolt from the blue, causing the neighbors to freeze. But then the shots began to sound one after another without a break. There were 14 in total, and they made people grab for their phones to call the police.
What is going on in America?
It was terrible. I didn't even dare to go outside. One of the neighbors recalled later in an interview. A few minutes after the
Almost
call, the street
400
was
now.
flooded with
What
police
the
cars,
fuck?
their lights blazing blue and red. Residents of the neighboring houses came out into their yards, anxiously watching what was happening. When the police entered the house, they were prepared for the worst. The sound of gunshots and then the unexplained silence aroused their suspicions. They moved
400.
cautiously through the corridor,
What the fuck?
checking each room. At the end of the corridor, they saw Naomi. She was sitting on the floor by the bed in Ayla's room. Her hands were bloody and her face was covered in tears. She was holding her daughter's lifeless body in her arms. Her voice
Thank
was
you,
quiet,
Lucy.
but the police could make out what she was saying. Forgive me, baby. I love you so much. I'm sorry. A few steps further in the other room, Malcolm's body lay, still dressed in his underwear. His body was disfigured by numerous bullet wounds.
I'm
And blood was
making
spreading
pasta.
across the floor, forming a huge puddle.
I can't see your
One
hair.
of the officers cautiously approached Naomi. Mrs. Bennett, you need to get up. Are you okay? Naomi looked up, her eyes filled with pain and emptiness. She did not struggle as she was lifted off the floor and handcuffed. She only spoke softly. I killed them. He destroyed us. I was protecting her. News of what happened at the Bennett home quickly spread among neighbors and further into the community. People were shocked that the model family that everyone knew and respected had become the epicenter of such a horrific tragedy. The community quickly divided into two camps. Some believed that Naomi had done the best she could under the pressure of terrible circumstances. She was called a heroic mother who was forced to do the unthinkable to protect her daughter. She did it for Ayla. I can't blame her, said a neighbor who had known the family for many years. Others, however, could not understand her actions, especially the mother of Ayla. For them, it was a crime that could not be justified. I can't even imagine how you could take the life of your own child, said a local resident who heard the shots that night. As police began their investigation, the truth about Malcolm began to surface. Medical examinations and records collected confirmed what Naomi had suspected. Ayla had been systematically abused. This went on for years, and Malcolm used his power and authority to cover up his crimes. Ayla's diaries found in the house shed light on her suffering.
That is sick.
In one of them, she wrote, I can't tell my mom. He says it's our secret, but I want it to end. These recordings became key evidence in the case. Society was shocked in two ways. On the one hand, by the horror of Malcolm's crimes, and on the other hand, by the tragedy that it led to. Naomi Bennett's trial was one of the most high-profile in Brampton. It attracted the attention of not only the local community, but also the national media. The courtroom was packed to capacity. Journalists, activists, friends of the Bennetts, and even those who had never met them before wanted to hear her story and understand what made this mother take such extreme actions. The prosecutor's office built their case around an obvious fact. 14 shots and the decision to kill her own daughter cannot be justified. The prosecution lawyer emphasized that Naomi had time to stop, but she acted decisively and in cold blood. We understand that Naomi Bennett was going through terrible circumstances. But is it possible to justify a person who took her own child? Ayla was a victim, but her life was taken not only by her father, but also by her mother, who was supposed to protect her, the prosecutor said in his opening statement. The prosecutor showed video from the crime scene, the evidence they had collected, including the gun with Naomi's fingerprints on it, and emphasized the number of shots fired, which indicated premeditation. Their strategy was simple. Demonstrate to the court that Naomi committed a murder that could not be justified under any circumstances. The defense, however, presented a completely different picture. Naomi's lawyer built his case on the fact that years of trauma, manipulation, and betrayal by her husband had led her to an emotional collapse.
It might not be like as bad as
confirmed that
why
Naomi
you
had
are trying to say that's the way to protect her from shame?
PTSD.
Say the journalists and everybody will be
She
after
was a
her.
woman who had lost everything. Love, trust, and faith in the world. She tried to protect her daughter, but the burden of the horrors she saw and the fear for Ayla's future broke her. Her actions were not cold-blooded. It was an emotional explosion of a person who could no longer stand it, the defense counsel said. The court heard testimony from neighbors and family friends who spoke about Naomi's love for her daughter and how she gave her all to ensure that Ayla had a happy childhood. Ayla's recordings were also presented, confirming the systematic abuse by Malcolm that had been going on for years. Naomi decided to take the stand herself. Her voice trembled as she recounted the events of that night. She cried as she recalled holding Ayla in her last moments. I couldn't bear the thought of her having to live with what happened. I loved her more than anything in the world, and I could not allow the world to make her a victim a second time. I'm not asking for forgiveness because I know what I did was wrong, but I am asking you to understand me, she said in front of the court. After 2 weeks of court hearings and lengthy deliberations, the jury found Naomi guilty of second-degree murder in Malcolm's case and guilty of involuntary manslaughter in Ayla's case. The judge reading the verdict emphasized that this was one of the most difficult cases in his practice. He acknowledged the mitigating circumstances, including trauma and stress, but emphasized that Ayla's life should not have been taken, even in desperation. Naomi was sentenced to 25 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 15 years. This sentence reflects the complexity of the case. We must recognize the tragedy that has occurred and ensure that this never happens again, the judge said at the end. The Brampton community was shaken by the tragedy. Memorial events in Ayla's honor gathered hundreds of people who brought flowers and drawings to the school where she had studied. Her innocence became a symbol of how easily lives can be destroyed behind the facade of a perfect family. Trust in the police was shaken after Malcolm's crimes were revealed. People began to question how such actions could go unnoticed and demanded reforms to better control the behavior of officers.
What day?
Many questions remain after the verdict. Can Naomi's actions be justified? Many saw her as a victim of circumstances, while others saw her as a criminal. The community also sought answers on how to prevent similar tragedies in the future, emphasizing the importance of support for victims of domestic violence. The Bennett tragedy has left the community in a state of constant reflection, a lesson no one would want to repeat.
All right.
Milano, sono pronta.
Mr. Kipling exceedingly good cakes.
I used to buy that a lot. Oh my god.
Our story begins in Columbus, Georgia. On the morning of January 4th, 2016, Columbus 911 received an alarming call.
Yeah. It is. Magnets.
Last moment before execution. She went crazy.
I like YouTube guys. I enjoy that too.
This is Pastor Dion Waverly, who wanted a divorce just 24 hours after his wedding over a shocking discovery on his honeymoon night. The marriage was supposed to be perfect, a respected Texas pastor and a powerful judge, a match that seemed made in heaven. But
so the other day, Chika came out publicly to announce that she's expecting her first child. But guess what? Nigerians were in the issue. And then it was the father of Chika's child.
Hey, my people. Tori don't get Agbada. Agbada don't care for Israel. Wahala be like picky when you knock on the leg, you did not for social media. As in the earth. As you are see this, our
Oh, shit. I just saw people tripping in.
she don't come and don't give us the food.
I was like,
And I
huh?
don't even know
What's going on?
to make you relax.
Only from me.
And she don't go tell us, say, she and younger sister, Chika, and sister, Chika, Ikena, make
I don't know.
big father to subscribe. This one go long go before yesterday, guys. We all see when the bring is Facebook, yes, social media. Like since how many days yesterday, but this very yesterday, hey, now fire, bomber to bomber, back to back. Now so they come out many bomber last time. Social media. Now so we just see say, Chica.
How would they do that, man? Stop it.
She won't disclose who will be with her. But in as much as she won't disclose her, we will say she but she as much as she's a big private time, we say yes, say now she's very
Thank you. Guys, there was a mouse in my sink. Seriously? Ugh. Not me. I don't know. I think it's fake, but the Regina did me up. It's not true.
The guy don't come and say not the man. When I come there, they say no, na it. The man come and say not the man. The guy come and say not the man.
How did he get there?
Why they are the police Nigerians are not the fire for this the boss lady are not like you again. They like you. I used to like her.
It's not finished yet.
But everything is lie.